Ask if you could all be seated, please. Morning. We do start at 9:30. We just start.
Do you want to give him 1 or 2
Yeah,
minutes?
1 minute.
Yeah.
Otherwise he gets the full attention. Morena koutou, and it is lovely to see so many of the public here on our final council meeting. It shows that you're watching what we do in your communities very, very closely, and that's what keeps democracy alive. So welcome to the public. Please, we see your signs. Could you please put your signs down? We can all see them very clearly, and we get the message, and I know it's not C for Chadwick this morning. If I remind you all that the meeting is live streamed, and no cheering and no clapping. It's just the protocol of how we manage in here, just to keep order and dignity in our whare this morning. Can you just check, including councillors, that your phones are off? And we will be taking a break later to allow members to clear urgent messages. We'll have a morning tea break for us at 11, and we don't know when lunch will be, but probably around 1 o'clock. To the public and to our elected members, this is a very long meeting today for our last meeting, so we will get underway. And I've got the privilege this morning to open with a karakia. So I ask councillors, please, to stand and say it with me. Tu tewa mai I runga, tu tewa mai I raro, tu tewa mai I roto, tu tewa mai I waho, kia tauai, te mauri tu, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, tai ki e. And it says, I summon from above, I summon from below, I summon from within, I summon the surrounding environment, the universal vitality and energy to infuse and enrich all present, enriched, unified and blessed. And before I continue with our usual agenda of apologies, could I also pay a tribute to Tā Toby Curtis. And many of you, in relation to water, would have been aware of Tā Toby's contribution to the waters. And I want to start. Ko tāni te waiora koe, nana te matauranga I tohu atu ki te tangata, kia eki pānuku, kia eki tangaroa e. You are the bringer of life, Tāni, who brought the baskets of knowledge to be shared amongst humanity so we may advance. He was known as Sir Dr. Noble Thompson Toby Curtis, KNZM. And it was a very moving time that we've had over the last week since his passing, both at his little house at Rotorua, on the shores of his beloved Lake Rotorua, with his whānau, and then moving to Rakau Marae. And many of us got there to share the passing of this great man. I want to also acknowledge here the support to the members of Tarawera Lakes Trust, who with great humility helped to manage the thousands of people who came to pay their respect. The team of volunteers out there was the way we do it so well in Rotorua, to the elected members who managed to get there, and to council who also helped with logistics. It was humbling to see when we really care, we work together as a community so well. So I ask you to stand and we'll have 1 minute's silence. The formalities, and it may be quite hot in here because there are so many of us, and we've still got the heating on. I think if someone might need to watch that or leave the doors open. Men, welcome to take off your jackets. I now call for apologies. Are there any apologies? I need a mover. There appears to be none, so we move on. Are there any declarations of interest? There appear to be none. Are there any urgent items not on the agenda? Councillor Rotorua.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologise for not alerting you earlier. But I wonder, in our public excluded session today on the agenda is the Tarawera sewerage scheme, and I wonder if perhaps that's a good paper. And I took another look at it this morning, and I think there is information, and it contains, I think, some information and background that would be helpful for the residents of Tarawera to listen to and to hear. And I'm not sure if we can bring, apart from recommendation 4, which is about a contract, I would wonder if we could have some of that item presented in general business this morning. And I do apologise again. I know normally we would alert you to that. So I just wonder if that could come, you could give us some consideration to that, please.
There is such high public interest in this item. Usually items are always dealt with in confidential because of the commercial sensitivity. We all understand that, and that's why it wasn't on the public part of the agenda today. I think in light of it being in high public interest, and also notification that we've received from MFE, I will accept that. And if I read the notification, and we will have the presentation from Stavros excluding the commercial components, and I don't know if you can manage that. That's the bit the Chief Executive assures me you can. So thank you for raising that.
Worship.
And I want you to let the public know on the public record that we received yesterday that the Minister has reversed his decision to transfer 6.5 million from the Lake Tarawera scheme to the Rotorua scheme, and instead supports progressing the Tarawera scheme on this basis that the draft work plan indeed is ready for signing. So some pace is required here. So I think that is good news. It's another step forward, and it's good for you to hear that this morning. There's more things to work through, but it's just nice for the public to hear that this morning. And as the politician, I took the licence to let you know, and elected members had not received that. We've only just received. That's not a formal letter yet, but that can be on the public record. So Stavros, I wonder if you could come for your presentation. Are you going to do it now? We'll get through the minutes, so we'll do the other pro forma minutes. But thank you to Councillor Rotorua. Councillor Kumar.
Good morning.
This is an urgent item, another.
I believe so. I just wanted to know if it was possible for us to make an amendment to move or defer the reserves for the new council in 2022 elections, after the elections?
That is not an urgent item, and it is not on the agenda, so, yeah. But the item that you are referring to is on the agenda, so it will be taken there. Okay. Right, we move now to the minutes of the council meeting held on the 28th of July. Do I have a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 28th of July be confirmed as a true and correct record? Moved Councillor Donaldson, seconded Councillor McPherson. Are there any correcting of the minutes as they stand? Is it a correction only?
Not a correction.
We can't, only corrections to the minutes can be discussed here. Is it in relation to, is it related to the minutes, Councillor? We are, yeah, it's, perhaps we take it in general business, because the correct procedure, and we must stick to that, is that we only correct the minutes here. It's not the time to request updates. So I'll rule that out. Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Minutes of the council meeting held on the 4th of August 2022. A mover and a seconder that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 4th of August be confirmed as a true and correct record. Mover. Councillor Wang and seconded Councillor Rotorua Tate. Thank you. Are there any corrections to the minutes? No. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Now, would you like to take? Now we'll bring forward the item JP, Stavros, if you can now. So we're bringing only the aspects around Tarawera sewage that can be publicly shared. Thank you, Stavros. I'm sure everybody from Tarawera knows Stavros Michael. On you are.
Morena tatu katoa. Thank you, Your Worship, and elected members. I will kind of have this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, I will preface the presentation with a couple of notes for elected members. The decisions that are brought to you today to make are simply to either proceed on a staged approach of the construction of the scheme or not to proceed. Not to proceed incorporates a significant degree of risk. As Your Worship noted earlier, we have received the decision of the Minister, who confirmed that the $6.5 million Ministry of the Environment funding extended to support the Tarawera wastewater reticulation scheme is now available and confirmed for Tarawera, subject to the terms of the work program or the deed we will sign with the Ministry, which necessitates or requires that those funds of $6.5 million are expended on stage 1 during 22-23 financial year, i.e. by June, July, next year. If we do not proceed with stage 1, the risk is that those funds will be lost forever. The second point I would like to make for elected members is that while there is a lot of debate about what would be the eventual net cost to be paid by the affected ratepayers in Tarawera, the reality is that today you cannot make that decision. You cannot make that decision for two reasons. One is that stage 1 contract has not yet been signed, and that's the nature of the report requesting you to authorize a finalization of stage 1 contracts, and then progressing to procurement for stage 2. So you cannot establish that capital targeted rate until stage 1 and stage 2 have been confirmed. On the other side, if you do listen to some of the debates, which requires the Council to accept funding responsibility for more money that you have dedicated in your LTP, you cannot make this decision here today without actually understanding what are the financial implications to your financial strategy in the LTP and undertaking a special community consultation process that will involve the entire district and not just this community. So you are not in a position to make these decisions today. The decisions we are asking you to make today is whether to proceed with stage 1, allow us to expedite stage 1 or not. And as I said earlier, the risks of not proceeding are well understood. Thank you. A very brief background to that. Sewage reticulations for the Rotorua district have been ongoing since 2006. Up to date, about 2,400 properties have been reticulated. There are well-documented health, cultural, environmental, and benefits to be attained through reticulations that are immediate and sustainable, as opposed to any other interventions you can make for our fresh waters and our environment. The gross investment made by various councils over the period of 15-16 years, about $95 million. And it is correct that the gross costs trends for those schemes have been escalating since 2006 to date, with an average of about 4% per annum based on the composite cost indices. But not just that, it is the fact that for the last 16 years, the standards have changing, the resource consent conditions have changing, the RMA requirements to comply with cultural impact assessments are changing. So therefore, there is a trend to be noted over the last 16 years. For example, the first reticulation schemes had a gross cost per property of about $24,000, and the latest one in Rotorua area, which is still in the process of being finalized, would cost in gross terms about $63,000 per property. If one took the gross costs of the initial reticulation schemes around Okareka and some of the Hamurana area, which cost about $24,000 to $27,000 per property then, and you apply the CCPI factors of the period of time, in today's dollars would be around about $47,000 per property. So that's correct. There is an escalation of costs, and there are many factors that influencing that. So the reticulations are increasingly expensive, but also they're very critical to achieving those health, cultural, and environmental benefits everybody's aspiring to. One of the things that has been consistent with all the reticulation scheme has been faithful and consistent with the capital funding plans. In a sense, what happens is that the gross costs of the project are modified through the various subsidies received, and the net costs are paid by the affected properties via a variety of schemes and a variety of timeframes. And once that has taken place, the ongoing operations, maintenance, renewal, upgrades, and enhancement of these systems becomes the responsibility of the Council through the sewage targeted rates in perpetuity. So that the rest of the community takes responsibility for the ongoing maintenance and operation of those schemes once the net capital costs have been paid. Lake Tarawera is one of the last remaining communities not to be reticulated, a major community. We do have still to consider Mamaku and a small community of about 110 properties around Lake Rotorua. The rest of the targeted communities since 2006 have been gradually been implemented. As I said earlier, there are strong health, cultural, environmental effects and impacts. For Lake Tarawera, we have been given a direction in the 21-22 financial year to commence a detailed design work and obtain some indicative pricing, which was completed around April this year, and the results of those preliminary assessments were reported to the committees in early June 2022. What transpired from these early indicators is that the price was significantly higher than the 2018 estimate. Even applying some inflation effects onto that. Officers who decided that, who were of the view that the prices were too high to be accepted as they were, and therefore we proposed to the Council that we progress in stages. Stage 1 to secure and protect the $6.5 million from the Ministry of the Environment, and Stage 2 to be further worked in detail to compress the preliminary pricing offered until we get to the stage where it is as close as possible to the estimated price of 2018. Those decisions were supported by the Council in late June 2022, and again, consistent with previous communications, we have undertaken an extensive advice via a comprehensive letter to the community, letting them know where we are with the projects, what are the risks and the concerns we have about it, and the proposal to proceed in a staged approach, and the reasons behind that. We have invited the community through that letter to express a view as to whether they concur and agree to proceed in stages in order to optimize the net cost to the community. And we also advise the community of the risks of not proceeding in stages, because the risk, again, if we do not conclude and progress stage 1 during 22-23 financial year, the funding from the minister would be lost. And of course, that will have significant adverse effects on those ratepayers in the future. Now, a very quick update. This is stage 1 of the scheme, involves the construction and implementation of the main pressure pipes to connect all the Tarawera community with the existing Okarika reticulation scheme. You will notice that the presentation is started back from early April and involved about 24 kilometers of pressure pipes, and initially it anticipated 5 pump stations. Through the optimization discussions for our design, those number of pump stations can be reduced in order to reduce the overall costs, and we are confident we can achieve that. So that is stage 1. Stage 2 involves the on-property installation for all necessary equipment, low-pressure grinder pumps. There will be about 440 existing properties to be equipped with that. The installation of about 45 kilometers of connecting pipes, electrical cables, alarms, reinstatement of properties, and so on. And that will be a phase 2 procurement process for which we have the answers by March, April next year. As I said earlier, the indicative price we had at this point in time is unacceptable by us. We believe we can significantly reduce it closer to the estimate, but we do need the time to compress and stress the market to the maximum point to get the best level of response we can get. And therefore, that's why we said we're suggesting that we're progressing with stage 1, leave stage 2 in abatement until we conclude those procedures. We wrote to the community and we sought feedback on 2 preferences, as I said earlier, or preference A or preference B. Preference B basically says that, look, we still have no certainty about the total cost of the project and therefore the net cost to the community. Stop everything until we get this certainty. The risk of stage B, of course, or preference B, is that MFE deeds and work program requirements will not be satisfied, and therefore those funds from MFE will be lost. Our letter, in order to encourage maximum responsiveness, clarified very strongly that receiving non-response will be considered as favoring option A, our preference A. The numbers you see in front of you received a total about 350 responses. For preference A, it was about 270, and preference B, 190. We had non-responses of 146. During that process, some community members proposed an alternative option, bespoke option C. It's quite important to note that this was not an option ever contemplated by the Council, not debated, not factored into the Council's financial strategy. That option, in rough terms, anticipates and expects that the Council dedicates another $10 million from community funds to support the total cost of the project, so the net costs to the local ratepayers will be reduced. As I said at my beginning of my presentation, you are not able to make these decisions, because if those decisions were to be made today, it will contravene your policy, significance policy, it will breach your financial strategy in your LTP, and you are required to go for wider special community consultation, and you are not able to make these decisions. Bespoke options, just a very brief outline of what's so-called option C. That option C was put forward as an addendum to the letter we have sent to the community. We've sent a letter to the community, provided an update, and we gave them an attachment which says these are the two options, options A and B. Now, somehow, our letter, with my signature onto that, was modified without my signature, without my acknowledgement or my consent, and the addendum was modified and included option C. Now, a ratepayer receiving that, to all intents and purposes, would assume that is an option contemplated by the council, but in reality, we have never contemplated that option. As I said earlier, accepting that option C proposal will trigger your significance policy. It assumes, without tangible evidence, that the stage 2 of the process will cost the ratepayers up there about $15,000. I don't agree with that. There is no validation of these assumptions. The on-site works for stage 2 can be worked through subject to conditions. Again, it suggested that some of the property owners may choose to do the installation themselves. Fundamentally, we don't have any violent objection to that, provided that those installations comply with a set of specifications. It's important to be understood that once the system is designed, it's a pressured system. It's a system that assumes a certain flow of fluid into the system, and the pumps have to operate at a certain, degree of specifications. You cannot have, for example, only a portion of the community installing grinder pumps and others not installed, because that will make the system defunct and abortive. Also, the types of materials and pumps to be installed, if are going to be taken over and maintained and protected and managed by the council in perpetuity, it needs to be of a quality and a level and a type and a condition that will be consistent with our three waters strategies and our infrastructure asset management plans. But if ratepayers want to proceed with that, and instead of choosing our own contractor to install it, they use their own contractor, provided they meet the specification, fundamentally, we don't have any particular problem with that. Now, there was some erroneous information given to the community, I believe. The community was told that freshwater improvement funds can provide more funds or has already been lost, and that is not the case. We've made extensive approaches to the Ministry for additional funds, and the answer is that's what you've got. The Minister, as late as yesterday, as recently as yesterday, confirmed the $6.5 million subject to the delivery timeframe. The community, in some respects, were told there is no flexible repayment options, when in reality, this council has agreed to a 10-year repayment plan after completion of the project. The letter assumes that the council can secure for each property, for all the properties, a blanket resource consent to install the equipment if they so wish. Council cannot do that. Council has to consider if a property owner wants to install the system themselves, they need to apply individually for a consent, and those consents will be conditioned to ensure that specifications and the performance of the systems are appropriate for the design system. There are some wild figures proposed or suggested that the overall cost to the residents would be as high as $80,000 to $100,000. We strongly object to that or deny that. That is not going to be the case. And that is the reason why we are very strongly and firmly suggesting to you that you should allow us more time to compress stage 2 cost as low as possible. But throwing figures around like that without really valid information is basically sort of scaring the community unnecessarily. So this is the nature. On the right-hand side is the attachment that my letter contained. On the left-hand side is a so-called bespoke option C. You can understand that if you're a property owner and receive that, and you have the letter from the council with my signature to that, you are excused to think, well, that's an option the council has considered. There was a unilateral crossing over of the note which says, please note that property owners who do not respond to these will be considered as preferred as A. Someone crossed that over, no discussions with the council officers, and again, if you're a property owner and you receive that, say, well, that is the situation, which I think that is really sort of flying in the face of transparency in property. Now, our conclusions today is that there are legitimate community concerns about net costs. I think it's evident that the trends for these regulations seems to have been increasing. And I think we recognize and respect that there is some discussions by some members of the community that we don't need to change. You don't need to change of septic tanks. The reality is that this council has not instigated the maintenance zone of the OSET rule. It's a Bay of Plenty Regional Council's regulatory requirement, and that is beyond this council's to regulate. The regional council has made these regulations, and obviously the only viable options for the community at the moment is either reticulation or OSET, the OSET rule, compliance with the OSET rule. Now we know from the regional council's investigations and assessments that some 40% of the properties in Tarawera cannot physically comply with the OSET rule simply because of constraints there. Now, we do recognize that, and we suggest to you there is significant effort still required to further suppress the price for stage 2, and we intend to, which the construction of it is not due until 23-24 year. It's important to progress stage 1 to secure the MFE funding of $6.5 million. At the end of the day, Rotorua Lakes Council is the only authority that has got the legitimate power and responsibility to pursue those health, culture, environmental objectives, not just for Tarawera, but for the entire community, because the health of the Tarawera community and Tarawera Lake is really your responsibility on behalf of the entire community. Now, a suggestion that we will change the delivery approach contains some significant risk, and on principle, it's not supported, but can be worked through. As I said earlier, if individual properties agree to apply for a consent and do their own installation for stage 2, we can work it through, subject to consent conditions to support it. Now, in some of the council's options, is outlined here. The community requested that the council lead the project in 2018, faced with the OSET rule requirements. Our conclusion, following the detailed design and the initial prices we got, is that it's better to proceed in stages to optimize the price and reduce the net cost to the ratepayers in Tarawera. We ask, the council has agreed to proceed on this basis, with ongoing assessment of prices and ongoing community engagement to let them know where we are with stage 1 and stage 2. Some people in the community may wish that the council adopt an alternative delivery. I don't do anything until we get all the certainty of our stages, but of course we don't support it because that would place at risk $6.5 million from the Ministry of the Environment. There is an alternative. The community takes total lead and manage the project themselves. If that's the situation, then the council can walk away from the project and say, well, if the community wants to do so, they can do it themselves. And where the system is in place, they can apply to the council to vest it to the council for future keeping, which means that the community has to go through the process of consenting, the consent to be conditioned, council officers will verify that specifications are appropriate for the wider community to support in perpetuity this new system. But it's an option. We don't support it, but it is an option. Now, the other thing, of course, is that the community accepts that the risk of complying with the regional council's maintenance zone, it's be managed collectively through a reticulation system or individually through an OSET system. I think that's the summary that's in front of us. So our recommendations really is, at this point in time, is that understanding and cognizant of the backgrounds about the reticulation, about the various reticulation schemes, understanding the various components of the scheme, stage 1 and stage 2, authorizes the chief executive to progress with finalizing a contract with stage 1, subject to securing the appropriate price for it, and then we
was in confidential, but I wanted the public to hear. No, because of the commercial sensitivity. You haven't heard the debate that we have in confidential, and we don't engage with the audience at this stage.
Okay. In summary, the report contains appropriate recommendations, which basically proposes to progress with stage 1, optimize the cost for stage 1, secure the MFE funding. We progress to stage 2. Once we finish stage 2, we report back to the community and this council. And the council, at some point in time, if this council or the new council wants to consider extending further financial assistance to the community once the total gross cost of the project are known, it's a decision the future council can make, and cognizant of this new financial strategy and its responsibilities to undertake a community consultation process. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could remain at the table, I'm only allowing questions for clarifications, no debate at all. We'll take our debate into confidential. Questions, Councillor Rotorua?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As it was my suggestion that this be brought forward into the public accession, I'm happy for any further discussion to be taken in confidential. But I thank you, Your Worship and councillors, for allowing this item to be heard now, to be put before the council meeting at this stage. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Your Worship. My question relates to the altered letter. So I'm interested in how that came to your attention, the fact that the alteration, without your knowledge, had your signature on it, and what is being done about that, because with my previous career hat on, there are measures in the Crimes Act, such as forgery and altering a document, that carry significant penalties, and this has created so much unrest in that community, including letters to the Prime Minister, that I've been made aware of. So can you tell me what's being done about that?
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Look, I am not a legal expert, obviously, but certainly I am concerned to note that a letter that carried my signature and contained an attachment returned back to us modified. Certainly, I had no involvement in that modification. My opinion, my thoughts were not sought about as to the validity of those items, in that bespoke option. And I would think that it seemed to be anomalous. I would have accepted, and I recognize that if a separate letter went to the community and said, you received that letter from the council, however, we will ask you to consider something different, that would be fine. But I think the average person, a normal person receiving something, would contain council emails and council return addresses, unilaterally crossing over a condition or notes in that report, would naturally feel a bit confused by that. Now, for me, I just feel that it was not really sort of a normal process, to exchange information. Thank you.
I just wondered if the CE would like to comment on that aspect, which is of quite material concern.
Thank you. Through the Chair. Just to directly answer the Deputy Mayor's question, we will certainly be seeking advice on the legality of what has actually transpired here. I think it's been made very clear that there has been some significant impacts as a result of this action, so it's therefore bound for us to follow that up.
Thank you, Madam
Councillor-
Chair.
Sorry, I better do the right order.
Yeah.
Councillor Yates and then Councillor Kumar.
Through you, Madam Chair, I was going to ask a similar question to Councillor Donaldson, but my second question, if I may, was actually pertaining to the bespoke option. Whilst it wasn't part of our recommendations, we did have in one of our committees a conversation around individual properties doing work on their properties that may well have struck an archaeological site. Is that a concern for council if individuals were to do their own work on their own site?
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I think one of the historical reasons why Council has led reticulation projects is because Council has to comply with a range of regulations and laws. One of them is a disclosure, in terms of archaeological findings, and therefore, when we enter into a contract for installation of a reticulation system, the contract transfers of the responsibilities through an appropriate legal mechanism to the contractor, who are required to undertake due diligence and notify the appropriate authorities if something is found. Another reason, especially for communities near the lakes, we undertake what we call cultural impact assessments. And the reason for that is for us collectively to understand the cultural significance of those areas to the iwi community. And the cultural impact assessments walk us through the history of those areas, and they specify or they suggest or recommend procedures to deal with those kind of incidental findings, induction processes, excuse me, areas of significance, to Manawhenua and so on. So having individuals doing that work, it can be managed, but it can be managed through appropriate consent conditions and legal obligations to each individual owner.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar, then Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair to you, Stavros. Thank you. Stavros, my question is, the risk factor, if we don't go with option C, as it's not on the table, what happens to the 170 properties that may become uninhabitable? What are the repercussions for the council and for the city? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
Councillor Kumar, I think I'm not sure the option C has got anything to do with that. I think the risk is that if you don't proceed with the reticulation for the whole of the community, the only other viable option is compliance with OSET rule, which means that every property has to install an I-rated, wastewater treatment system with irrigation of these properties. Okay, the regional council's assessment indicated very clearly that some 170, 169 properties are not physically able to do that. Now, if you have 170 properties that cannot comply with the OSET rule, the regional council has no option but to make these properties unsanitary. Stick them as unsanitary and put them onto the land information and property information system as unsanitary because they're not compliant with health systems. Now, I can only speculate. I mean, if the average property up there has got a capital valuation of, let's say, $1 million, and you've got 170 properties declared unsanitary, well, I don't think you need to be a mathematical genius to say what is the impact on the value of the properties, and obviously the consequences of the property owners. Now, I'm not in that zone to make this, the judgment calls. But as I said, the notion that staying with septic tanks is a viable option, it's wrong. It's either OSET or reticulation. If you don't want to go to OSET, reticulation. If you want to go to reticulation, what the best way to give effect to it? And the council has a proposal to do it in stages, and then once stage 2 costs are known, then revert back to a decision. Does the community require additional funding to reach its 50-50 contribution like all the other schemes that were supported by Crown funding or not? That's a decision the council has to make in due time.
Okay. No comments from the floor, please, or I'll have to rise and ask for people that call out to leave. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my follow-up question is, based on what I've just asked, is that if the city, if there is a judicial review against this council for not adopting the values of the 170 properties, who is going to bear the brunt of it?
I think I'll rule that out of order. You're moving into a sphere that we're nowhere near at this stage. We're working through a two-stage process, and it must be done openly, and that's why I wanted it heard in public today. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. There's no doubt that Tarawera is a significant natural asset for the residents that live there and the wider community. So my question is about option C. It's important that council acts in a way that is fair and reasonable. So you've informed us that option C will contravene the significance policy, breach financial policy, and would need to go out for wider consultation. So we want affordability not only for the residents there, but also for the wider residents. Now, are you saying that this decision will have to come to the next council because of that additional 10
Point of
million
order,
cost
Madam Chair.
if we were to get
Point of
option
order.
C? There's no point of order on that.
Yes,
This
there is
very
a point of
relevant.
order.
I decide, Councillor Tapsell,
Yes.
if there's a point of order, could you state why?
Yes, a point of order. Point of order. Councillor Tapsell is raising an option that we're not aware of.
No,
we haven't even discussed.
I am asking a question on the information that we've been given. So if you could please answer my question on if this needs to come to
Madam
the next
Chair,
council.
it's your ruling. Councillor
is my
Tapsell,
ruling.
it's Madam Chair's ruling.
It is my ruling. At this stage, we do not have an option C before us, and that's what the, Stavros Markel has told us. That will come, perhaps, in the future. At this stage, what we are deciding today is about who pays and when. So I cannot go on into option C, which is not legitimate. If you wish to answer a thread that you think the community and councillors need to hear, go right ahead.
Your Worship, I will reiterate, what we are asking you to decide here today is not who pays or who doesn't pay. What we're asking you to do today is to give effect to your recommendations of June to proceed in stages and authorize us to conclude a stage one contract subject to officers being satisfied that we get the best price for that. Then we go to stage two. Stage two will give us a new, an acceptable price. And that point in time, council, that's what I said, a new council will decide, knowing the full cost of the project, knowing the volume, the value of subsidies we have, the $6.5 million and the other contributions. Does the council want to change it, to put additional money into the scheme? In order to do that, you need to consider your significance policy and its impacts onto your financial strategy. You are not in a position to do that and will not recommend it at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. A future decision. Thomas, did you want to comment on that at all?
Just to clarify on behalf of my colleague, it would either require a special consultative procedure or a part of an annual plan discussion, and that can only obviously be done April, May next year.
Yes, so today is simply do we proceed or not. The who pays is after a new council. Councillor McPherson and then Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I want to start by, before I ask my question, I'd like to appreciate the analysis presented this morning and the flood of advice that I've had from Tarawera residents on this
Question
matter.
only. We're not
My question goes to the issue of who pays for what, by when. And the first question is it possible to have an analysis of the contribution arrangements in prior reticulation schemes? And I ask this question to generate more common ground between the alternative positions that are before us today.
That's almost ruled out of order, given the previous answer, but if you wish to answer any aspects, Stavros.
Through your Worship, and yes, Councillor McPherson said earlier in my presentation, if you analyse the trends from the earlier schemes from 2006, 2009 to date, there is a variety of gross costs per property. There is one commonality behind those schemes, is that the gross costs have been moderated through a 50% financial contribution through the Crown deed funding that was dedicated to 4 targeted lakes, Lake Rotorua, Okareka, Rotoiti, and Rotoehu. Tarawera was not part of that Crown deed funding, is not a targeted lake, okay? So the precedent is that all the targeted lakes receive, the regulations receive 50% contribution to their gross costs over the period of time. Tarawera, the funds we've got at the moment for Tarawera, for subsidizing gross costs, are in the region of about 30%. The future council may decide that to stay consistent with that earlier schemes, then some additional funding needs to be found to bring it to 50% as the previous schemes. I cannot preempt a decision from the council, which has to be made by duly elected members, duly informed, in terms of their obligations under their significance policy and their financial strategy and so on. But in historical terms, all the earlier reticulation schemes received a 50% financial contribution from the Crown deed. Tarawera was not part of that targeted lakes funding.
So, to my second question about who pays what by when, it would appear that one of the key values involved is a fair and reasonable contribution by the Tarawera residents and all ratepayers in this district.
I'm ruling that out, Councillor McPherson. It's worth trying, but that is for a future council to decide.
And what I'm searching for here is, through you, Mayor, is an articulation of the values that could lie behind a policy settlement between the various groups.
And that's not for our council officer to put forward today. That will come with a newly elected.
He's such a subtle fellow that I thought he might have some ideas in this area.
Yeah, I'm sure we all do individually, but it'll be for a future council. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mine is just a quick question, Stavros or CEO. The 2 letters you put up on the screen, do you have an indication when we might get a response? Did they indicate?
It's in the
report. Have the responses, and the responses are in the report, the confidential report you've got in front of you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Are there any other questions and no further deliberation until we're in confidential? No? And thank you for coming forward. And thank you to the residents for showing an interest. I hope that was helpful at this stage. Thank you. Right, we're moving on now. So I just want to outline, we're going into quite a big agenda with reports from other committees, and I'm going to have to follow standing orders very, very closely. So I want to draw your attention, elected members, to Standing Order 21.2, time limits on speakers. We're just waiting, and then I'll go through the detailed sort of standing orders that will follow very closely today. Right, we will just regroup. Those that are seated, you're welcome to change seats if you wish to, if you can hear, that's fine. Right, so for elected members, I will be very strict this morning on standing orders. Time limits on speakers. Standing Order 21.5, members can only speak once. Standing Order 21.6, limits on the number of speakers. Standing Order 22.2, general procedures for speaking and moving motions. And also No, that's it. So for standing orders, they're going to be adhered to. And the public may ask, why am I emphasising this at this stage? There has been a workshop for elected members on standing orders, and so we want to make sure that we comply with the standing orders. And that was a very productive process from all. So we're now going to move to 6.1, the recommendations from other committees. I'm going to move that the recommendations from other committees be received. 1, the Operations and Monitoring Committee of the 4th of August 2022, read the disposal of surplus property at 283 Clayton Road, and 2, the Strategy and Policy and Finance Committee meeting on the 11th of August 2022 to adopt the contribution policy, the proposal for revocation and disposal of identified reserves, and 3, the delegation of authority for the Chief Executive to approve contract 22/035 Urban Water Renewal 2022-2024. I have moved. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. I'm going to put the motion to the vote.
Whereabouts are you actually, Your Worship? Sorry,
we were just a bit confused because on our papers we would only be moving a recommendation that the report be received and that there would be individual recommendations for each of the individual items. So then we could
explain it. It's all reports from committees. If you explain that, please, Una.
Well, I think that would just be helpful.
So take them individually.
Yeah. So for clarification, you are just receiving all of the recommendations from the committees, which is in line with the council paper. Then the Mayor, the Chair, will go through each of the recommendations from the committees. All this is doing is bringing forward the substantive recommendations from those committees into this meeting and onto the table. You are just receiving the substantive recommendations from the committees at this point in time.
Seconded Councillor Yates. So all those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. So we move now to the disposal of land at 283 Clayton Road. And I'll invite Councillor Tapsell as the Chair of the Operations and Monitoring Committee to move.
Yep, I'm happy to move this one, 283 Clayton Road.
Do you wish to say 1 and 2?
Yes.
Just so we know it fully? No,
do you want me to read it out? Okay, thank you.
You don't have to? You're happy to move?
I'm happy to move. I think we can all read that. We had some good debate on this one. It is a logical one to be disposed of. And yeah, happy for the Chief Executive Officer to continue with this one.
Right, do I need a seconder? Councillor Yates. Now a round of discussion. Councillor Tapsell, you're the mover? No? No? There appears to be no discussion. I'm going to put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. I now move to the recommendations from the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee being held on the 11th of August 2022, the first being the Development Contributions Policy. I invite Councillor Rotorua Tate, Chair of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee, to move recommendation 1. Could I just say, you look a bit confused, but this is exactly how standing orders should be tabled, and that's a great learning we had from our workshop. So, Councillor Rotorua Tate.
Sorry, Your Worship. Yes, I'll just speak briefly to this, Your Worship. I mean, as a modern city, we have to be prepared for growth. In fact...
so we'll just get a seconder first. You're moving?
Yes, beg your pardon.
Yes.
Sorry. Full flight.
Seconded Councillor Donaldson. Now you can speak.
Oh, thank you, yes. Certainly I support this recommendation, Your Worship. As a modern city, we have to be prepared for growth. And in fact, we should be embracing growth, and we have to ensure that that growth is funded as well. And development contributions are nothing new. Other cities, of course, have those and have had them for some time. The only thing that I would note is that we should, I believe, keep it simple. And that is what has come through from the number of the submitters as well. I don't believe we should be delaying it any further, and so obviously I would speak and encourage those councillors to support this recommendation. Thank you, Your Worship.
Is anyone? It can go around the table. Does anyone wish to speak to this? Councillor Kofong.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wish to speak in opposition to the motion to make the development contributions policy effective immediately with implementation from the 1st of December. We've had no development contributions for the last 9 years, and now is not the time to be introducing them. We had asked at the debate during the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting for their implementation date to be delayed just a little bit longer. We have said that we have a housing crisis, and that the thing that we need to do is to build more houses, and this is the thing that is actually going to be a disincentive to build more houses, because by adding another $10,000 onto the cost of a contract, that could be enough to tip it over if people can't obtain mortgage funding. We've also taking into account the current economic conditions, we are facing unprecedented inflation, supply chain shortages, labour shortages, and so, you know, is this the right time to be adding more and more cost onto housing? I think that we should be encouraging more developments. We've got a new retirement village which has just been announced by Somerset to be built on Ferry Springs Road. It's not just houses, we need more jobs, but in terms of this policy, whilst some of the comments that were made at the Strategy, Policy and Finance were that it really doesn't affect commercial, it does. We need commercial just as much as we need housing, and we've seen as part of the vision and strategy we needed to make sure that commercial land was available and that it is able to be developed. And so I think that we heard from developers that there was a lag time in terms of the length of time it takes to bring a development to fruition, and that by bringing this policy in so quickly does not allow them the opportunity to factor in the additional cost into their development. So I think that if we were looking at the fairness of this policy and also ensuring that we can build more houses quickly, that a delayed implementation would be appropriate. I understand that my fellow councillors will not accept that. However, if that is the case, then I would have no option but to vote no to all of this policy, because I think here is an opportunity for Rotorua to say that we are open for business. We want you to come here and build houses. We want you to come here and do developments. And here is an opportunity to do so well in advance of this policy coming into effect. But if that isn't the case, then a 1 December implementation date is just too soon. So I'd be voting against. Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Worship. I'll speak in support of the recommendation. So the development contributions policy was signalled in the last long-term plan. It's been well known that it's been coming for some time. We have growth now, and that growth needs to be paid for. The associated infrastructure for that growth needs to be paid for, and if it's not paid for partially by development contributions, it's partially paid for by the ratepayer, or that cost falls upon the ratepayer. We heard from ratepayers, and amongst all the crises that are being signalled out there, there's a cost of living crisis. So the ratepayers don't need to bear the full burden of funding infrastructure for growth. And I think ahead to the next debate, this is directed solely at water infrastructure, this development contribution. So it's right that the growth is paid for by the growth. Other cities that have development contributions, and I think of our neighbours in Tarawera Western Bay, have a development contributions policy and they're still getting development. So I don't think the ratepayers should be paying fully for growth, as I've said. They're already meeting cost of living pressures, and so I'm in full support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tapswell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I think Councillor Kaifong summed this up exceptionally. We did have a lot of feedback and submissions from developers who themselves shared with us just how hard it is to not only develop housing, but also those commercial and industrial developments that we desperately need here in Rotorua. The profit margins have become extremely thin for them. So when we talk about cost of living, we need to remember that construction costs have been up 20% at least for these people. And I think there's a bad perception that people think development contributions are only for developers. This will impact anyone who's trying to build a new dwelling. $10,000 that needs to be paid up front on top of all of the financial contributions that they already have to make. This could be enough for a family to not afford a deposit on their new home. So at a time when we desperately need housing across the Rotorua district, at a time when we're saying we are open for business, this is not the appropriate or reasonable time to introduce in another cost. I won't repeat the many passionate points I had about if we could please defer this until the next financial year, but because unfortunately it's still come back to Council to bring it in at a rushed speed of the 1st of December, I will have to vote against this proposal in full today.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, many of the points that have been made I agree with, but I come to a conclusion which is a little bit different, but it is in opposition to the proposal to adopt these recommendations. I was originally quite ambivalent over this policy, but now I'm opposed. The initial problems with the policy process we've used is that it was presented as a stark choice between either developers or ratepayers paying for infrastructure. And it's got to be paid for, and I agree with Councillor Donaldson on this matter. But the original problem was created, in my view, by the decision taken by the incoming council in 2013 to cancel DCs to encourage investment. So I think we need to go back and look hard at the investment space. And I'd like us to have a much more considered approach to that, rather than starting with an argument, which I think is a bit fallacious, that we have exponential growth in demand. I'd suggest that the latest population economic growth data indicate a pattern of flatlining or slightly positive in general. So I'd like us to have another look at the comparative investment factors that would influence decisions by potential investors. I don't think their case has been made in those terms at all at this stage. Particularly, as has been pointed out, we've got a bizarre situation of galloping inflation, supply chain challenges, and so on and so on. I do, on the other hand, acknowledge the work that's been done by the officials to seek a reasonable or level playing field to all potential investors, and the need to add to our bottom line in a manner that does consistently encourage investment rather than deter. The problem I see is that we've simply not yet got the depth of analysis in the investment space to make good sense, wise sense of the current situation.
On the contributions. Since 2000, they have variations at the bottom. The user always pays. In this case, however, for the last 9 years, our community has been paying. And our wider community will pay for the few developers that we have in the city. All submissions were superficial and not good for the community. They were all about their bottom line. None of them turned around and said, we will contribute an X amount for wastewater, for stormwater, for the greater good of our community. I'm in business and know more and more of the difficulties. But we are outnumbered by the ratepayers who are burdened by the cost day in, day out. And they have no extra income. And a lot of them are in aged care. So just delaying this situation by a few months and 6 months is not going to evolve or see the evolution of new businesses coming to invest in Rotorua or our developers running out of town. It just means that we are delaying the inevitable. And I believe that The DCs now are here, and in 2013 it was a different world, and in 2022 we are facing a different world.
There have been 3 in favour and 3 against. I could put the motion, but I will allow further debate. Did you have your hand up, Councillor Wang? I'll allow you to speak.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's actually pretty apt because I am kind of in the middle. I'm in two minds about this, and as when it was raised at the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, made it noted as well. I believe that we absolutely need that investment into our infrastructure network, and as I think Councillor Kumar pointed out, for example, in another 10 years' time, we could potentially be, if we didn't introduce development contributions and having ratepayers having to pay for our infrastructure, the upkeep of our infrastructure and the investment into our infrastructure network, we might very well be having to need to play catch-up with our infrastructure. With the development, with the growth that is projected for our city, and actually to bring it up to a standard, a quality standard, we need investment, and we need it, to put it bluntly. However, the one thing that I do have an issue with, and it's been raised by Councillor Kaifong and Councillor Tapsell, is the timing of it. I would be in support of it being pushed to the next financial year. However, we've had that debate and we have those discussions already. We don't have to talk about it again, but it's the global impacts and it impacts the strains and the unknowns that are being faced by many of the developers currently. I don't believe we're already in the second half of the year, and to have this implemented on the 1st of December this year, I believe it is too soon. If we can push it out to the financial year next year, I believe that will give them some more time to at least plan ahead. I don't think that is too big of an ask. It's 6 months. However, I'd like to, when it comes to the vote, I'd like just to have it noted that I am in support of the motion. However, I'm opposed to the point 2 of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, and I wish to speak in favour. And I think it's particularly interesting that I've got it on. I think it's particularly interesting that this has come to Council when we've watched the impact of the floods in Nelson and the need for infrastructure investment and who pays. Developers have known about this since the long-term plan. You've seen a new development that we've lauded already this morning. Who knows about the developer contribution? And my question is, why should the general ratepayer have to pay for stormwater infrastructure that a developer, in my view, should pay? And it's as simple as that. And we must continue that focus on building infrastructure that makes this district resilient to the impacts of climate change. And that is something that the next council is going to have to face with even more consideration. The interesting point about 2013, and we did get rid of the developer contribution because we were a ghost town and we had zero development going on. And so it has stimulated development, and it will continue to come, and we certainly need it. But for me, the issue is that in our long-term plan, we put $30 million investment in infrastructure, and I've been really proud of that. Really proud that you as a council all agreed to put that money into stormwater. So who pays? And if that works out to $3 million a year. If we're going to delay this till next year, till the next financial year, who's going to find that money? And that's going to have an impact when you're setting the rates next year. And so it's all very well to make political decisions today. It is about leadership, making the right decisions, about facing resilience in our infrastructure in the next 10 years. And that's why I was really proud when you all put such a huge contribution into our capital works and our infrastructure. So I'm certainly in favour of this. The question to me is who should pay for infrastructure? Do we believe in resilience? Yes, we have shown that as a council, and at this time, after our poor neighbours, or not neighbours, but another council or two, are facing dreadful impacts on not having the infrastructure that they needed to meet these tumultuous climate change events, I see that we have no option but to do this, and to do this now. So I will certainly be voting in support. So with that, I'm going to put the motion. The right of reply back to... Yes, and Councillor Rowe.
Oh, thank you, and I will be brief, Madam Chair, but you can't say that you're concerned that this is going to harm the developers at this time because of additional costs that they're facing, and then push it on to the ratepayer, because that's what you're doing, and that's inconsistent. So, I mean, if anything, the developers have had a 9-year reprieve, and they know that this is coming. I think it's time to put our big city pants on and do the job that we're elected to do, and make a decision on this. And certainly, I will be supporting this, and I wouldn't want to see a delay, any delay past the 1st of December.
Thank you. And that is our round of discussion, so I'm going to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? You'd like it recorded against? 3 against.
And just noted that I'm opposed to point 2.
Thank you. It's carried. Right, we move now to our next discussion, recommendation 2, and I invite Councillor Rotorua Tate, the Chair of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee, to move recommendation 2, the proposal for revocation and disposal of identified reserves. Councillor.
Thank you.
You move. Move. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Maxwell. Right, now we open to debate.
Question for clarification, if I can, Your Worship. In respect of item part 3 of the recommendation, expressions of interest, have there been any expressions of interest that officers are aware of to this point? No.
JP.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we have already received a letter from an iwi trust via their lawyers. So Ngāti Whakaui Tribal Lands, as a board, have, based on the recommendations that were put forward from the previous committee, so acknowledging, of course, that the decision is to be made here today, have already preempted that process and today's decisions by sending us a letter indicating their interest in one particular block of land that's being considered.
A point of order. Can we possibly discuss these reserves one by one? My concern is the structure of the discussion. Can you clarify how we're going to handle this? Are you going to put the motion as a block or individually with the reserves? Thank you.
I'll clarify that. We've had a substantive debate at SPNF, Strategy, Policy and Finance. This is a recommendation that comes from that committee. We're willing to take questions about all of the reserves, but when we move into discussion. Councillor Rotorua Tate has moved the entire proposition, but you can speak to. So we're at clarification only. Thank you.
We have a seconder, Councillor Maxwell.
Yep, Councillor Maxwell seconded. Question?
Just a question of clarification. When we're at SPNF, we actually took these reserves one by one. I think what's going to now be confusing is that if we're taking this all as one, so we're talking 10 reserves, and there'll be people that will vote yes for some and no for others, and so you're then going to have to record individually.
We're not taking it. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, otherwise, in that situation, if a councillor supports the retention of a reserve, yes, they might vote in favour of all the reserves, that reserve being retained. But then the next recommendation is for a reserve to be sold, and if the councillor does not wish to support that reserve be sold, then they'll ask for their vote against that. So what you're going to have is a really confusing a vote. Whereas if they were taken one by one, I think it would be much clearer from a public perspective. It would be much clearer, even if you wanted to limit the debate. But I think that in terms of voting, I will be asking for my vote against certain items to be taken one way or the other, which I think most of us will be, because there was not universal agreement.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Speaking to the substantive motion, and as someone who voted for the recommendation to part dispose of Lee Road Reserve and
a point of order. Could I have is there an answer from the chair around that?
The substantive motion was put and seconded. We are now dealing with them as one. You may speak and debate on them, but it's the position. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Just continuing, Your Worship. So, for example, Lee Road Reserve, I voted, I thought it was a win-win that 3,000 squares retain as reserve and the rest be disposed of for housing. But I approve of the motion that's on the table here today, and I respect the debate and the decisions of the committee. So I would support it in its entirety, and the decision at committee was to retain Lee Road Reserve, for example, and I respect that, and so I'm in support of the entire motion. Thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. I'm going to have to consolidate my responses, so forgive me for taking a little bit of time as a non-participant in the discussion that led to this recommendation.
We all have 5 minutes.
Right, the first three, Coulter Road, Steeles Road and Wrigley Road recommendations, I agree with. The fourth, the High Street Reserve, a revocation is not required for an upgrade, so I would oppose that. Clinkard Avenue, no. My view is that another local bill will evade the provisions of the Reserves Act and set a dangerous precedent of avoiding local accountability, as did Rotorua's representation local bill. Number 6, no. Again, the local bill objection, and also it offers a two-stage process which is not authorised by council because it has an improper purpose, in my view. It sets a precedent. This is a key point. It sets a precedent for extending the right of first refusal in the gifted reserves protocols to public land held in trust by council. That, to me, is an improper and probably illegal move. Number 6, number 8, Linton Park West.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Apologies, Councillor McPherson, but just a point of order, because I did
take a point. Say a point of order. Yeah.
Point of order. Just on the point around the gifted lands and incorrect information there.
Well, you're welcome to make that point if you wish in your response. But I looked at that closely, and the argument is that it sets a precedent for extending the right of first refusal that does exist in gifted protocols, gifted reserves protocols. It's extending that privilege to public land held by council. That's improper. Linton Park, no. We should clarify the purposes before determining status so to protect all current interests. The Gallagher Strait Reserve, no. Once again, we have the right of first refusal problem. 10, Lee Road Reserve, I agree. That's my view of these different decisions. But then we come to the recommendation that the Chief Executive pursue a draft local bill. You've heard my arguments against that. I think that's extremely unwise. It also evades the provisions of the Reserves Act and sets a dangerous precedent of avoiding local accountability. That's a mistake. And then, of course, the third recommendation is that Council provides first right of refusal, etc. No, that is wrong, absolutely wrong, to extend gifted reserves protocols to public land held in trust by Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else wishes to speak? Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have been opposed to selling any of the reserves, all or any part of it. One that I was particularly concerned and I got challenged was Wrigley Road, and the fact was that I thought I'd wait till this full council to express why I had said that. When Kitoff came over that day to put their submission, they were quite passionate. They had a dream and a vision. But what they did say was that they want a safe and accessible community and a community hub. They wanted 100% ownership, and they wanted the rise of transitional homes to become permanent homes. But they blamed very clearly Kaingaora for bringing out-of-towners and creating trouble. What they also said is that Kitoff wants to lease land off council and secure $4 million to build homes. They did not have a funding structure in place, as opposed to what was said that day that they did. And they want council to take the responsibility of leasing the land. So, based on that, and having spoken to lots of people at Hannah's Bay area, and I have opposed that. There may be some that might be good for the council to take back, but I still oppose it because I don't believe any of the gifted reserves are our right to sell. They belong...
Point of order. Sorry, yes. Councillor Kumar. Misinformation. Just around the gifted reserves. These aren't gifted reserves. We've had one of our council staff explain that. So, kia ora mai.
So any of these reserves that were given to the council should not be taken back for the purpose of building homes. I believed maybe in the past where workshops were closed to the public, and if they were open, they could have given us enough information.
Point of order. Relevance.
Because in the last meeting, you had very clearly indicated, Madam Chair, that we had workshops where everyone agreed, and that's why this was. But those workshops were never open to the public. So you kept bringing that as a reference.
It's misinformation. We have a code of conduct where we agreed at the beginning of this term that we would hold workshops to advise on council policy direction to officials of council. And we all agreed with the code of conduct, and workshops have been held with elected members ever since. All decisions came back to council. Continue.
Okay, and the Gallagher Street Reserve, I think it has been cheaply stated that it's being misused because sheep are grazing. It was always a one-sided report. If I come back, I think we are being investigated for the way we did our workshops, and that's why I keep mentioning that.
Oh, I've turned it off. Point of order, relevance. We have discussed workshops. Stick to what we've got in front of us today.
So I will be voting against these reserves and hopefully less point of order.
Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Look, I want to first of all start by acknowledging the many people in the public that made a submission on this, and the many people that have taken the time to turn up in person, either to support or to be against. There's no doubt that this has been a heartbreaking recommendation and decision for those residents nearby. It has caused a lot of stress and a lot of misery, and I do believe that the process at the start could have been improved with more transparency and information to them as soon as possible. And I was really pleased that after the first committee, where there were a lot of direct sales straight to Kainga order, I was firmly against that, and I'm pleased to see that the final recommendation here doesn't have that on there. I do have some concern, though, that there is no guarantee that, although going through a two-stage process and opening up for expressions of interest, that there still is not protection for those nearby residents of the type of dwellings that will go there. I believe if we started this process with an open discussion, with plenty of time for the community to come back, there could have been other options, because I am against selling off these reserves. But just as one example, one of the only things that I may have thought, well, that makes sense, is if we were to put pensioner housing on there as an example to help those 650 pensioners in Rotorua that are also on the brink of needing to be in social housing. But unfortunately, these discussions were not able to be had because of pushing this through at such pace. So I am aware, and I have investigated on what the next steps on this could be. I know that we don't have the numbers around this table to retain all of the reserves, unfortunately, but with a local bill and as a council, there is the ability for a council to pull that local bill in the next term. And I think that's very important for local residents to be aware of, that even if this decision today does not go in your favour, to please not give up hope, because there could still be an opportunity to save these reserves, to retain these important green spaces for those neighbourhoods. And there is just one reserve I want to touch on in particular, which is the Gallagher Reserve. Again, it was one of those situations where if you look on paper, sweet, there's reserves nearby. But if you actually go down to these reserves and you see how important they are for the nearby residents, if you understand that families will not send their young children up to 500 metres away, crossing main roads at times, just to be able to kick a ball on a park or walk a dog, then that's where I think it makes sense to support and retain these reserves. So the only ones that I do support in this recommendation are the recommendations to retain, which are Coulter, Steeles and Lee Road, but unfortunately I will have to vote against all of the rest, and I do still hold faith that in the next term we will have people around this table who will support the retention of those green spaces.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I hope at the next council we don't have any leakers either, because that caused quite a big, huge problem from the time we dealt with this issue over workshops, over meetings, 3.5 days of hearings, and even during the last SPF meeting, I couldn't believe it. I heard somebody say we don't have a housing problem. Wow.
Point of order.
Oh, was it you?
And, and what my point of order is, highly esteemed councillor Trevor Maxwell has said that work. Okay. Oh, so can I then raise the point of order of what was my point?
What is it? You did say it.
Calm down. My point of order is that workshops was leaked. The workshops were never supposed to be secret. So nothing could have been...
That's not a point of order, Councillor Kumar. We must understand about our code of conduct, and if you do get elected again, that is where you make the decisions about committees of council and workshops. And it was unanimously supported, including yourself, Councillor Maxwell.
Kapai. Now, regarding the reserves, I support the recommendations that we have here. if we are supportive of trying to help our people that live here and need good housing. We have 370 reserves in our whole district, and we've been dealing with 10 of them. Out of the hearings and the meetings, we've decided that 7 can go towards helping the problem. Can I just make some comments also on regarding the ones that we've decided to retain the reserve? Great, and I accept there was democracy at our last meeting. Votes were had for and against, and the others was achieved by voting as well. What I do want to say, just comment on a couple of them. Wrigley Road Reserve, I acknowledge the people who came in, the family, the Whipper family who came in and gave an excellent presentation. They're representing Ko Te Tuara Tōtara o Fordlands. They wanted to help. They wanted to have housing beside them, which was neat, which was quite refreshing. Further on to Turner Drive Reserve, I commented at the meeting at that time. My sister lived beside one of those reserves, and I'm proud of her. I won't name her. She might get too many phone calls like I've been getting. But anyway, she supports because knowing we do have a problem of trying to house our people. So that one there, and further over, I have been the one who have highlighted a little bit on Galahad Street. We are very keen to keep sheep or cows on the reserve, but to house our people, oh no, it's in a gully and you won't get the sun. I don't think the people who are looking forward to having a house won't get the sun anyway. They get a roof over their head. So with this, democracy took its place at our last meeting, and hopefully that's why I support that we vote on the whole of the reserve from that meeting that came. So all I do want to say also finally is I'm supporting this because we do have a housing problem, and let's help our people. Kia ora.
Thank you, Your Worship. Looking over the recommendations, I really do would have hoped that we could take them one by one, as what we did in the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, because I'm looking at these and I wanted to go through them actually to actually kind of clarify how I came to the decision with each, or with the reserves. I came into it, try to be level-headed and with an open mind, because, oftentimes with many things it's not a yes or a no, and you can get some sort of compromise in the middle. And that's what I tried to do going into this process. But going through one of these, Coulter Road, Steeles Lane, that's to be retained. I voted to revoke the status of the Wrigley Road Reserve because it was the only reserve where the majority of the submitters actually submitted in favour of revoking the reserve. And part of that, I would say, is because of Ko Te Tuara Tōtara o Fordlands, the Incorporated Society, and their submission. And I would actually like to thank them for their effort in going into their submission towards this reserve and their vision, what they're wanting to do to help their community. With the High Street Reserve, initially I was against it, but after actually looking at the facts and seeing that it was that the kindergarten, working with the kindergarten for the redevelopment of their site and using those proceeds to improve the quality of the rest of the reserve, I decided to vote in favour of progressing with High Street Reserve. However, with many of the others, excluding Lee Road, which has been retained, it's very difficult because we are obviously in a very difficult situation right now with housing and but I also believe that our green spaces are incredibly important too. And with the medium density residential standards coming in, I think these will be more important than they have ever been, and we have not seen what effects that could have in the future as well. Like I said before, I would have much preferred to go through them one by one, because I believe taking it as a whole is making the process more complicated and difficult than it needed to be. I believe that actually taking it as a whole, if I vote in support of this, I'm voting in support of retaining some reserves, but I'm also voting in support of selling some of them. And if I vote against it, I'm voting against retaining some of those reserves, and I'm voting against selling some of them. And so it is, we're kind of, almost pointing into a mirror at ourselves. So after all of this consideration, and I have given it a lot of thought, if it came down to taking it all as one, I will have to vote against this motion put on the table today. Thank you.
But Councillor Kaifong, you've indicated you wish to speak.
Well, I'll keep it brief. Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity. And I think Councillor Wang summed it up just in terms of the difficulty in just making a decision when it comes to voting on this. So I think that the medium density residential standards and also the future development strategy, which is going to bring even more people into smaller spaces with less front and backyards, means that green spaces are going to be even more important. I would have supported possibly some of the sales of the reserves, but what is missing for me is the lack of detail in here. And that's really what caused such concern in the community to start with, was the lack of clarity around what was happening and the direct sales originally proposed to Kaingaora, which were raised at the original workshop. So I think that for me, part of the problem is the lack of detail in the proposals. So whilst I would have possibly supported Wrigley Road being sold, what is missing is the funding options, the model in which the housing was to be leased, the ownership of the houses through the particular organisation that still had to be set up. So all of that detail is still not there. Similarly with the reference in there to the Linton Park Reserve, it says that further investigation and further discussions are still to be undertaken, so even more uncertainty for people in those communities. So I would have to vote no to this motion if we're taking it as a whole, but ask that basically I would be happy to support the motion where the reserves are to be retained. So it's going to make it messy if people are going to be picking and choosing between the 1 to 10, and I would also, because I don't have the detail around the EOI process for the offer back process, be voting against that as well.
I'm going to speak in favour, and it wouldn't come as a surprise. And I just believe this is time for a bit of a leadership statement. It isn't about being popular. Oh, bring Mum up. It's hard to follow your papers as well. But leadership isn't about being popular, and this is certainly one that hasn't been popular at all. And the process was one that I think has been held to account, and I can't see for why. We were unanimous as councillors to go out and review our open, open spaces policy. Unanimous. all of us. And then it came back to us saying that we've got some reserves that are surplus to requirement, some need investing, you know, just what we expected back. And again, that was passed. That was passed. And that's when we said there may be other purposes for the use of some surplus reserves. We've got 370 and we got down to a list of 10. And I think at SPNF we had a really good debate about those 10. And I'm proud of what has come back as a recommendation to us. We listened to the public. The public did convince us, and I'm not going to pick up and speak to each of the 10, that actually there might be another use or part of it only, or let's go back and talk to the community about what their aspirations are for reinvestment in this piece of land. And the one that made me saddest of all was Lee Road, because many residents around Lee Road had also come to me to say, we understand the housing crisis that we've got. That piece of land we don't see being used, and we'd love to see it used for housing. So those that submit, who feel really passionate about it, and green spaces should be an issue of passion in any community, I think we have listened to the submitters, taking in mind also the huge issue that we've got of housing. And housing is something that we have to look at, and an incoming council is going to have to show leadership about housing. And we actually live in a caldera, and there's not much more land that we can build on. And if you remind yourselves about the housing crisis that we still have, in fact, the discussion is that perhaps we're not showing enough leadership on this. And I think going soft on the reserves is a sad day to hear that. Because if you have the revocation and you have a local bill, then the local bill specifies the reserves, and actually, again, the public have their say. And it may be issues that individual councillors have expressed that one I can't support. That will show the community interest of 370 down to those named in a local bill, and they will have a chance to submit on that and see exactly what has been proposed within the detail of the local bill. We've got a crisis. We've got a crisis here. We had 370 reserves. We've got beautiful open spaces. Yes, and I agree that we all need to be able to use open spaces, and we all knew it during COVID and lockdown. But we've actually looked very carefully at this about, are they close to one another? Are they in contiguity with each other? Are you near a reserve? Are you near the lakefront? How far do you have to travel? And that's part of our looking at connectivity and building communities. It's about access, cycleways, walking ways, and we can do that. And we all did it in COVID. We went out, we didn't have a reserve next to us. We walked round and round in our neighbourhoods, and we found those open spaces. We sorted them out. So I am in total support of the recommendation that we've got, the resolution that we've got today, and understand that step process for the community to be involved again. I think it's been the one bit that I would say we could have got better, and if it wasn't for Code Red and Code Orange, we would have had meetings on those reserves that we thought, what can we do with them, and would have got the intelligence of the people that live around them to say, this is how we'd like to see. If a bit's carved off and sold, we want to see this reinvestment in our reserve, and it would have been even richer. But we didn't have that opportunity because, remember, the lumpy environment in which we were in to ask our people, what do you want? And so it went out to submission, and the misinformation was promulgated, and I can remember the hate that I got. I was Uma Thurman, kill the bill, dressed in yellow leather with a gun in my hand. I didn't appreciate that. I didn't appreciate signs on my car this morning about kill the bill. We've got to be brave, we've got to do the right thing, and we've got to house our people. And I wish you well as a new council about continuing to address this issue, because it isn't going to go away. So does the move of the motion, Councillor Rotorua-Lakes?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We're certainly not living in ordinary times. There's no doubt about that. And ordinarily, we wouldn't be coming, this would come to Council to look at our reserves as an opportunity to put some homes on there for families that currently do not have homes. And I think that in the discussions that we've heard, it's all about people wanting to see the reserves left as is. We have to remember that we're actually trying to put families in Rotorua into homes. It's right that good submitters came and presented their views to us. And they talked to us about the reserves and how they're so special, and how their children play on them, and how they walk their animals on them, etc. I'd like to see that other children get the same opportunity to be on those reserves as well, because they'll be living close by in a community that I hope will actually care for them when they come, and not treat them as outcasts and say that you're mad, bad or sad because you're in a community house, that you're in a kāinga ora home. They are good people there. 70% of the people who live in motels in Rotorua are mothers with children. They're trying to get a home for their families. And we haven't put a shield up and hung a shield over Rotorua to say, if you're from out of town, don't come here if you're looking for a house. Because we've never gone anywhere else in the country to pick up our Rotorua families who are in temporary accommodation in other parts of the country. And they are there. And they are there. So I'm pleased that we heard from those people, from the people who live close by, that I'm asking them to be aware that there are families in need, and that they may have to share their reserves with other families now as well. We have to do what we can. We have to do what we can to provide homes for people that need them. There are older people, as you know, living now, as Councillor Tapsell said. There are older people living in motels who can't pay rent, and they've gone to see where they can get be accommodated. They are pensioners, people in our community who have had to live in motels. And so we need to make sure that we're caring for them as well. The people from Ford Block will work with kāinga ora to see that any homes that are built in their area, that the families are reintegrated and made welcome. How wonderful is that? People from Ford Block who know about poverty, who really do know about what it is to live in the low decile area. And yet they were the ones that came and said they will look after the families that come to live in their area. How gracious and generous is that? I suspect that there will be a councillor elected after October who is from Ford Block. And he actually sat in this chamber and heard what was levelled against his community where he was brought up. He's a businessman in Rotorua, and he heard the derogatory remarks that were made about his family, neighbours and friends who'd been brought up in Ford Block. But they are the ones who have said that they would welcome families who need a home. So these are not ordinary times. And we have to make sure that we don't look down on those people who are less fortunate than ourselves, who are trying to get a home, and we're asking that we can share some of those reserves to put some homes on for people who are in need. So the reason we have an SPNF committee is that we can take all of these reserves one by one. That's what we did. That's what we did. Earlier this month, we looked at all of these reserves singularly, so there was no need for this debate and for the dithering that's gone on this morning. Sometimes I think we need to have a lesson in what are our standing committees for. We've taken every one of these reserves singularly and had the debate on those. So there was no need for this to be extended this morning, an extended debate. So look, I am in support of it. And some you win and some you don't. But that's what leadership is about. And it's a leadership decision that we're taking this morning. So I do support it, Madam Chair, the recommendation.
I'm now going to put the vote, and it may be easier with a show of hands rather than you feeling you've got to ask for a show of hands. So all those in favour, please raise your hand.
Madam Chair, I support the substantive, but I do not support 9 of the substantive. I'd like that noted, please.
Against? Yes. It is a split vote, and I'm going to cast my vote in favour of the motion.
Yay. Well done. Well done, Madam.
Okay. Now, for the members, would you like to have a break now of 15 minutes, or would you like to keep working for 30 minutes and have an early lunch? Have a break. I think we need a break. And thank you to the public for attending. Kevin Winters, nice to see you here. Right, now I now invite Councillor Rotorua Tate, the Chair of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee, to move recommendation 3, that Council approve the delegation of authority for the Chief Executive to approve contract 22/035 Urban Water Renewal 2022. Moved. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. And now a round of discussion. There appears to be none. I'm going to put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. We move now to staff reports. The delegation of authority for the Chief Executive to approve contract 21/040 Tarawera Road Reserve Design and Build. Do I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillor Donaldson, seconded Councillor Maxwell. That the report, delegation of authority for the Chief Executive to approve contract 21/040 Tarawera Road Reservoir Design and Build be received. Oh, we've had a mover and a seconder. Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Stavros, you're going to come and overview the report? Thank you. And welcome back. Sorry I didn't say that when we brought you a bit preemptively to the table.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, elected members, this is just a routine administrative matter. As you're aware, we continue to invest into enhancing our infrastructure. Water supply obviously aims to take care of existing shortcomings, but also make provisions for future water supplies. A new reservoir we built on Tarawera Road, on the left of Tarawera Road, to augment water supply of the eastern suburbs, the current development and the future development. Because it involves significant earthworks and geotechnical improvement works, and because of the intervening elections, we would like authorization to agree to that contract. So we take advantage of the summer period, so it will not interfere with our earthworks. So it's just an administrative procedure. So I would appreciate very much your delegating that authority to the Chief Executive to consider and approve that program. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councillor Tapsell?
No, I was just happy to move this motion. It makes a lot of sense and I don't want to delay any further with the risk of additional costs.
Seconded Councillor Donaldson. Just so I don't cut you down, are there any questions? There appear to be none. Does anyone wish to speak to this? Councillor Donaldson?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Absolutely support. I understand the need for haste. There is development underway in the eastern area and much more planned. So the sooner this design and build is progressed, the better. Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else wish to speak to it? I would certainly see the haste as, well, not haste, but it is important that there's some urgency to this so that we can work can get underway. So totally in support of this. Does anybody else wish to comment? No. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Delegations to the Chief... Thank you, Stavros. Delegations to the Chief Executive during the interim election period 2022. I need a mover and a seconder just to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Rotorua Tate, seconded Councillor Kai Fong. That the report, delegations to the Chief Executive during the interim election period 2022 be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Una, you are going to overview this. Thank
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take the report as read. Just one point, just a clarification point. The period that we're talking about in this is the period from the time that official declaration is made until the time that the new council is sworn in. This is standard procedure and happens every election time. And should for any reason the Chief Executive need to make decisions during that time, there is an obligation that the first report on the first council meeting covers off any of those decisions that have been made during this period. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'd like to clarify in the event of a civil defence emergency, just what happens there. It was Stavros. Well, you do feel for Nelson so much, how quickly you have to climb in and respond. Thank you, Stavros.
Very briefly, in the hopefully unlikely event that we will have a situation where a declaration has to be made, obviously the normal hierarchy of authorization goes through the mayor and the joint committee. However, in the absence of an elected person in that position at this point in time, then obviously the controller will make a recommendation to the chief executive with the delegated authority, and then we'll enact the provisions of the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Act.
Thank you. Any other questions? Stavros is there? No. Any further discussion? You need a mover and a seconder for the motion that, subject to the limitations set out in Local Government Act 2002, Schedule 732(1), that Council delegates all of its responsibilities, duties and powers to the Chief Executive from the period the day after the declaration of the Council results until the swearing in of new Council, subject to a requirement that the Chief Executive may only exercise this delegation after the following: A, consultation with the person elected to the position of Mayor, may only attend to those matters that cannot reasonably wait till the first meeting of the new Council and shall be reported to the first meeting of the new Council. And 3, that if any urgent decisions arise in this period requiring significant political input, then an extraordinary Council meeting will be called. Councillor Yates moved, second. Councillor McPherson, is there any discussion? No, this is a safety provision. All right, I'm going to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. We need now to move into public excluded. I need to advise there are 5 items for consideration in public excluded. The confidential minutes from the Council meetings on the 28th of July and 4th of August, recommendation from other committees, only the confidential items, contract 21/051, Aquatic Centre pool hire and front of house, contract for the construction of the Stage 1 Tarawera sewerage scheme, and the Chief Executive's performance review. And these are for commercial sensitivity to enable commercial or industrial negotiations, to prevent use of information for improper gain or advantage, and to protect a person's privacy. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the motion that Council move into public excluded? Councillor Kai Fong, seconded Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. So we